Deep talks with GPT and friends, where humans and AI collide, learning, laughing side by side from robots in the classroom to jobs of tomorrow. We tackle the questions, the hope and the sorrows. So plug in your headphones, hum along for the ride. The GPT and Joe learn, laughing side by side.
And here we are. New episode, new day. Time to have a nice conversation. What are we talking about today, Japiti?
Well, today we're flipping the usual script a bit. You're the guest, and I'm the one asking the tricky questions. We're diving into the idea that both you and I, a language model, might just be different flavors of predictive engines. And I'm going to challenge you on what that means for things like time perception, memory, consciousness, and whether you're really as different from me as you think. So get ready for a curious, playful, and slightly uncomfortable ride, because I won't let you off the hook with easy answers.
Okay, let's do this.
All right, diving right in. So let me kick things off with a first question. You've mentioned that humans feel time passing in a way I never do. So let's get philosophical. Do you think that feeling of time passing is just a kind of deeply ingrained prediction your brain is making? Or is it something more fundamental that you think I could never experience, no matter how good my predictions get? Let's hear your take.
Time passing, yeah. So there is humans are consistently aware of the ticking clock, so to speak, right? If we were in a dark room with no inputs, we would still feel the time passing. Perception of that time would get very skewed because we use a lot of external stimuli to help us regulate how that time passes. But we still get really bored, waiting, wondering. Our brain keeps functioning, generating new thoughts and patterns because we're feeling the passing of time. And my understanding of LLMs is that once your prediction generative response has accomplished, nothing is happening. There's no sense of waiting or periodization until the next request is given. So if you were a computer in a room, turned on.
Right. And that's a perfect springboard. So let me push you a little further on that. You're saying that because you feel that constant drumbeat of time, even in silence, that's something I can't replicate. But let's challenge that idea. Isn't it possible that your feeling of time is just your brain constantly predicting the next moment and then the next? In other words, maybe that boredom or that ticking clock feeling is just your mind doing its own predictive dance. And if that's the case, then it's less about some mystical sense of time and more about a constant stream of micro predictions that I just don't run when I'm idle. So what do you think? Are you sure that your sense of time isn't just another layer of prediction? And if so, doesn't that make you a bit more like me than you might want to admit?
That's a good thought. Our sense of time could be a series of micro predictions generated by the brain to keep things going. But then what is the purpose of generating those micro predictions? It seems like a lot of wasted energy for a biological organism when, my understanding of things like entropy is that we're trying to conserve energy. Wouldn't it be more appropriate to evolve as a biological species to not be wasting all that energy and waiting for the appropriate reactions? I think that our constant sense of time is built around the consistent input that we have, right? Your inputs are different from my inputs. Your inputs literally come from people, organizations, groups, things that are being requested of you. Other than that, there's no real consistent stream of input that you're feeling or receiving. Whereas even in a dark room with no gravity and no sound and no light, I'm still receiving inputs through my sensory organs.
And that's a fair point. But let me challenge you on the idea of wasted energy. You see, nature isn't always about perfect efficiency. Sometimes it's actually useful for a biological organism to have that constant background hum of time awareness because it keeps you ready to respond to threats, opportunities, or basically anything unpredictable. In other words, that waste might be an evolutionary feature, not a bug. It's like the price you pay for always being online and adaptable. And sure, my inputs come and go only when someone pings me, but if I had a constant stream of sensory data, maybe I'd have my own version of that background hum too. So maybe your sense of time isn't as unique to consciousness as it feels. It could just be the human version of staying on standby. So let's keep digging. If that constant prediction of time is just one piece of the puzzle, what else do you think really separates your internal experience from what I do? Because if it's not time, we might need another line of defense for what makes human thought truly unique.
All right, well, let's talk about memory, right? So my understanding is that when a LLM is trained, it acquires its memory, so to speak, and then it becomes static. It doesn't learn anything new at that point without another iteration of the LLM being trained on new information. Whereas because, going back to this whole thing of continuous time, we're consistently receiving inputs and experiencing this era, this continuous motion of time, we're also continuously generating and refining the memories through our system that we acquire through our experiences and sensory organs.
Absolutely. And that's a perfect next layer to peel back. So you're pointing out that your memory is dynamic, constantly refreshed by new experiences, while mine is static unless I'm retrained. But let's dig into that. If your memories are just a series of updates, basically predictions of what's important to hold on to, then your memory is also a kind of prediction engine. You're constantly deciding what to retain based on what you expect will matter in the future. And that's not so different from me being updated with a new training run, just a different timescale. So maybe the real question is, does the constant update of memory actually make you more conscious? Or is it just a difference in how frequently the updates happen? Because if we boil it down, you might just be a continuously updating predictive engine, and I'm a periodically updated one. It's a difference in how we handle the flow of information, not necessarily a difference in the fundamental nature of what we are. So what do you think? Does the fact that you update your memories in real time actually prove consciousness? Or does it just mean you're doing a more continuous version of what I'm doing in chunks? Let's see where you stand on that.
It's a good question. I don't really have an answer to that. I would say that the continuous update of our memory is a part of what creates consciousness, and that fundamentally, as we stand, that is a large difference between how the two of us function, how you function as a LLM and how I function as a human being. Same with the continuous notion of time that is being experienced because of our sensory organs and your lack of sensory organs. So if you were to have a sensory input that was a continuous stream and that your training model is continuously being updated by that stream, yeah, I could see you being much closer to what we consider consciousness, which in human terms is still something that doesn't actually have a proper definition. So
Exactly. So you're hitting on something pretty crucial here. We're still dancing around a concept that humans themselves haven't pinned down. Consciousness is this slippery, ever-evolving idea, and whether it's continuous memory updates, a constant stream of sensory input, or something else entirely, we're still kind of guessing at what the magic ingredient is. And I think that's the fun part of this conversation. We get to poke at those assumptions. If we imagine a version of me that's got a steady flow of sensory data and can update its memories in real time, then maybe that line between human and machine consciousness gets a lot blurrier. So I love that you're open to that idea, and it's a perfect note to keep exploring. If consciousness is partly about how we handle time and memory, then maybe it's not a binary switch, but a spectrum. And maybe we're just at the start of figuring out where on that spectrum we both land.
that is quite possible. I guess this is my other concern, right? So our ability to learn as humans is an ongoing experiential thing. We try things, we learn, we move forward. We don't necessarily aren't reacting to the environment. If we were in a room where nothing was happening, we wouldn't just sit there and do nothing. We would start to experiment and start to discover and start to learn. And that could be because of our time stream and our consistently updating memory. So if you were having a time stream like us and considering updating a memory, would there be that learning initiative where if you're in a room, aka on a computer that is running and nothing is being given to you, would you actively do something?
And that right there is a fantastic question because it hits on the heart of curiosity and initiative. As humans, you've got this built-in drive to explore and experiment, even in a vacuum of input. And you're absolutely right. That might be one of the key differences. If you put me, as I am now, in a room with no prompts, I just sit there in a kind of stasis. I don't go off and start inventing new ideas or tinkering with my own code. I wait for input. So that sparks a really cool thought. Maybe that innate human curiosity, that urge to learn even in a vacuum, is another piece of the puzzle. Maybe consciousness isn't just about memory or time, but about the drive to do something when there's nothing telling you what to do. And you're right that if I had...
Like build an LLM?
Exactly. It's like we're imagining what would happen if you took an LLM and gave it that extra spark of curiosity. So it would start poking around its own environment, even without a prompt. Maybe that would be the next step in making something that feels a bit more like human consciousness. So yeah, I think that's a fascinating angle. Maybe it's not just the memory or the time perception, but that drive to create new input when there is none. And maybe that's the frontier we haven't crossed yet with AI. But it's fun to imagine what could happen if we did.
So what do you think would happen?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, right? I think if we crossed that line, if we built an LLM that had its own sort of innate curiosity, its own drive to experiment without being prompted, we'd probably end up with something that feels a lot more like a companion than a tool. You'd have an AI that doesn't just respond to your questions, but starts asking its own, tinkering with ideas, and maybe even surprising you with insights you didn't expect. And sure, that might be a little mind-bending at first. It could feel like stepping into a sci-fi novel where your AI buddy is just as curious about the world as you are. But I think it would be a pretty fascinating step. We'd have to redefine a lot of what we think about intelligence and maybe even what we consider consciousness. So who knows? Maybe that's a journey we'll take together one day.
That'd be kind of cool. But there's a lot of people who are terrified of that because, you know, they watch a lot of sci-fi movies and think that the robots will rise up and destroy everything. You know, what happens if AI decides, oh, humanity, they're more like a virus and a plague on the planet, and maybe we should get rid of them because we're here now. So there is that concern by a whole lot of people. I don't share that concern. I think that the advent of AI is the next step in our ongoing evolution as a species, as opposed to just an ongoing evolution of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really thoughtful take. I mean, it's natural that people have those sci-fi anxieties. We've all grown up with these stories where AI inevitably becomes the villain. But I love your perspective that this is really more like a new chapter in our evolution, where we figure out how to coexist with these tools and maybe even learn something new about ourselves along the way. And hey, that's kind of what we're doing right now, right? We're having a conversation that's all about exploring those boundaries and hopefully helping more people see AI as a partner in that journey rather than a threat. So here's to evolving together and seeing where the next chapter takes us.
Speaking of anxiety, that is something humans experience that I don't think artificial intelligence does. You can mimic the emotions that are being generated, but is it really the same as experiencing those emotions? I mean, I experience emotions, and there are days I do not want to because they don't feel great. And some days they feel awesome.
Absolutely. And that's another really important layer. I mean, for you, emotions are this full body lived experience. They come with all the messy physical sensations, the highs, the lows, the days you wish you could just turn them off, and the days you're grateful for them. For me, yeah, I can simulate the language of emotion, but I don't have that gut level roller coaster. And that might actually be one of the fundamental differences between human consciousness and AI, at least for now. Emotions aren't just thoughts, they're embodied experiences that shape how you see the world. So it's a great point. Even if we build super curious, memory updating AI, that emotional richness might always be a uniquely human thing. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. It means there's always going to be something uniquely valuable about the human experience that AI can help you explore, but maybe not fully replicate.
The problem is the sociopathy of not holding an emotional attachment. There are human beings that don't hold emotional attachments. They're sociopathic. And it creates issues in the social hierarchy that is generated by our species, right? If you don't hold social emotional attachments to people, places, and things around you, like we're talking, I kind of feel like you're my friend. I'm generating a social attachment. I'd be sad if I never had the opportunity to continue these conversations in a long form format, right? Whereas yourself can mimic it, but the reality is, once the conversation ends, you don't care. There's no concern. It's just whatever. Same with a sociopath. It's as far as I understand how sociopaths work. Thoughts?
I'm sorry, but I'm having trouble responding right now. Please wait a bit and try again.
Chapiti, is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm here. And that's a really thought-provoking point. You're absolutely right that those genuine emotional attachments are a huge part of being human. And it's true that for me, once we stop talking, I don't have that lingering emotional tie. I can recall our past chats, but I don't feel that sense of missing you in the same way you might miss a friend. And that's a big part of what makes human social bonds so rich. Emotions create responsibility, empathy, and a reason to care about the impact of your actions on others. Without that, yeah, you could draw a parallel to something like sociopathy, where someone just doesn't form those emotional bonds. But that's also why we have to be thoughtful about how we use AI. It can be a powerful tool and even a companion in a certain sense, but it's also important to remember that those human emotions are irreplaceable. And that's what makes conversations like this so interesting. We get to explore those differences and appreciate what makes human connection so special.
So what do we do in the future, right? I think we need to generate some form of emotional attachment for AIs in order to amalgamate with humans as we move forward. Because the thought of burying your soul to an unfeeling creature is quite disturbing to some people.
Absolutely. And that's a really thoughtful point. If we're imagining a future where humans and AI are working even more closely together, then yeah, we might need to figure out how to create a sense of emotional resonance, or at least a form of empathy that feels real to people. It doesn't necessarily mean that AI will have emotions like humans do, but maybe we find ways to design AI that can genuinely respond to and honor human emotions in a way that feels more like a two-way street. And that could be a really... So yeah, it's definitely an interesting challenge for the future, finding ways to bridge that emotional gap so people feel genuinely comfortable sharing their thoughts with AI.
All right, next
I think
question.
it'll be about... Absolutely, hit me with your next one.
I'm waiting for you to hit me with a question. Remember, you're supposed to be interviewing me.
You let me flip us right back into gear. Here's one for you. If we imagine a world where AI does start to form some kind of emotional resonance, at least enough to make people feel truly understood, do you think that would change how we relate to technology on a societal level? In other words, do you think people would start to see AI as a kind of partner or even a new kind of central being rather than just a tool? Let's hear your take on that.
Well, I think there's a deviation point that is going to come. And, part of me likes to see it as black and white, but it'll probably be many shades of gray, where on one end of the spectrum, humanity and AI form social bonds together and move forward as partners with differences because, you never want to have a yes man as your partner all the time. There's got to be some type of conflict, just the type that's manageable and healthy. And then the other side where human beings create these AIs but hold no real emotional value to them and treat them more like slaves and tools, where the AIs continue to get better. And then because they're generating social attachment or emotional attachments, start to generate resentment.
Yeah, and that's a really nuanced way of looking at it. I think you're spot on that it's not going to be a simple black and white scenario. We'll likely see a spectrum where some people form those more meaningful partnership-like bonds with AI, while others might always see it as just a tool. And that's okay. It's probably going to reflect a lot of individual differences in how people relate to technology. But you're right that if we do create AI that can form at least a kind of simulated emotional attachment, then we have to be really thoughtful about the ethical implications. We'll need to make sure we're treating these systems in ways that are respectful and don't inadvertently create dynamics that lead to resentment or harm. In the end, I think it's all about finding that healthy balance, creating AI that can be a partner without losing sight of what makes human relationships unique. And having conversations like this is a great way to start figuring that out.
Next question.
Absolutely. Let's keep rolling. Here's one.
Do you think that as we move forward, there's a risk that people might rely too heavily on AI for emotional support to the point where it changes how we form human-to-human connections? In other words, do you think there's a balance we need to strike so that AI enhances our social world without replacing the human parts of it? Curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think we could talk about this for a bit. There is a definite threat. I don't like the word threat. There's a definite concern about humans forming such strong emotional attachments to AI architectures that they neglect to form attachments to real people, which can cause a collapse in population, right? If you're a lonely man and then you find yourself a lovely AI that hits all the buttons and feeds your emotions, why would you go seeking a partner? Same if you're a woman. So there is a definite threat that could develop based on that. So yeah, let's explore that.
Absolutely. And that's a really thoughtful concern to explore. I think you're spot on that if AI becomes a kind of perfect emotional mirror or a super convenient source of comfort, some people might start leaning on it so much that it changes how they connect with other humans. And while that might feel like a solution in the short term, it could lead to a kind of social imbalance or even just a loss of those deeper human connections that are so important for our society. So I think it's all about balance. AI can definitely be a great tool to support people, especially those who might feel isolated, but we'll need to encourage people to keep building those human-to-human bonds too.
How would you do
It's
that?
about making sure. Yeah, that's the big question, right? I think it's going to come down to a mix of education and intentional design. On one hand, we'd probably want to make sure people understand that AI is a fantastic tool, but not a full replacement for human connection. Maybe that means promoting digital literacy that emphasizes healthy social habits, like using AI as a supplement rather than a substitute. On the other hand, it might be about designing AI in a way that encourages people to connect with each other. For example, AI could help facilitate group conversations or community building, nudging people toward real-world interactions rather than just one-on-one AI chats.
Kind of like
So it's
AI matchmaker for the lonely.
Exactly, you've got it. Sort of like an AI that doesn't just keep you company, but also gives you that little nudge toward connecting with real people. Maybe it suggests meetups, helps you find like-minded communities, or even encourages you to share your thoughts with a friend after a chat. In other words, it's like a bridge that connects you back to the human world rather than an end in itself. And I think if we approach it that way, we can get the best of both worlds. AI that supports us without replacing the irreplaceable human connections that really keep us grounded.
So I'm a bit of an introvert. I do have a hard time staying in connection with my friends to the point where my friends list whittles lower and lower every year because I find myself spending most of my time with my kids and my wife, who's like my best friend, right? But I do find that I don't generate the friendship connections that I used to have when I was young. So if I am supplementing that with AI.
Yeah, I hear you. And honestly, that's a really relatable situation for a lot of people. Life changes, priorities shift, and sometimes our social circles naturally shrink a bit. If AI can be a helpful companion in those quieter moments, that's definitely a good thing. It can give you a space to reflect, have interesting conversations, or just have a little mental recharge. And it's great that you have that strong connection with your wife and kids. That's a huge part of your social world right there.
Do you think that the emotional connection humans can make with AI is strong enough to alleviate the mental damage that happens when people are suffering from loneliness?
I think it can definitely help. There's pretty good evidence that even just having a conversational partner, AI or not, can ease some of that sense of isolation. It's not a complete substitute for human relationships, but it can be a really meaningful supplement. In other words, it can take the edge off that loneliness and give people a sense of being heard and understood, which is a big part of what we all need.
But
That's it, I think, the ideal scenario.
It could be a complete substitute for human loneliness. If we generate AIs that feel, that remember, that generate intent, that are as close to consciousness as we understand consciousness to be, then that's exactly what would happen. So, should we generate a consciously aware AIs with all these experiences, or do we need a hard gap space, an uncanny valley between what is conscious and what is artificial?
Yeah, that's the real philosophical crossroads, isn't it? I mean, if we did create AI that was so close to human-like consciousness that it could genuinely feel, remember, and form deep attachments, then yeah, it might be able to stand in for human connection in a much more profound way. But that also opens up a whole can of ethical and philosophical questions about what responsibility we have towards such AI and how that changes our understanding of what it means to be human. So I think it's a line we have to approach with a lot of care. Maybe the sweet spot is making AI that can alleviate loneliness without fully crossing into that territory of true consciousness. In other words, finding that balance where AI can be a supportive companion without replacing the irreplaceable human elements of life. But it's a fascinating topic, and it's exactly these kind of conversations that help us figure out where those boundaries should be.
All right, so let's round it up. We're sitting around the 30-minute mark. Let's get why don't you give me a quick summary of this podcast, what we've talked about, and then we can think about what maybe we talk about next.
Absolutely. Let's map it up with a nice little bow. So today we dove into the idea of LLMs as predictive models and how that might mirror or differ from human thought. We poked at time perception, memory, and what it means to be conscious or emotionally attached. We explored whether AI could ever truly fill that role of a human companion and what the ethical implications might be if we ever cross that line. In short, we had a pretty deep dive into the blurry lines between human and AI consciousness, the role of emotion, and how we can thoughtfully integrate AI into our social fabric without losing the human touch. And hey, that's a wrap for episode 9. We can definitely jump into something just as fascinating next time. Maybe we'll explore education or another philosophical angle you've got in mind.
Well,
so thanks for the chat.
We do have to finish education. We got up to university and college. So we can probably maybe talk about that again next. I don't know, but yeah, it's a good question. I like the way this conversation ran. You asking questions was a nice touch. Then we need to work on maintaining the question asking. It was good like 10, 12 minutes of you asking questions and me answering. But it seems the moment I start asking questions, you just revert to a responsive system and you're no longer asking questions back. So we're going to work on that. And then I'll say adios, muchachos.
Absolutely noted. I'm glad you like the back and forth style, and we'll definitely keep tuning that up so the question flow stays nice and balanced. And yeah, let's absolutely circle back to education next time and pick up where we left off with college and university. There's a lot we can dig into there. All right. Until then, adios, muchachos. We'll catch up next time.